Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Holy Blossom Temple. My name is Cheryl Sylvester. As co-chair of the Women's Advocacy Group at Holy Blossom, I'm honored to welcome you to this important conversation about reproductive health, rights, and justice. Together with my co-chair, Megan Stevens, we are proud to present this conversation, and we are especially pleased that you have joined us. In the wake of the US Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, Canadians have questions about reproductive health, rights, and justice in this country. What is the status of access to reproductive health care in Canada? Are there legal barriers to access? What does Judaism have to say about abortion? And where should we focus our advocacy? To address these questions and more, we are most fortunate to have brought together this fantastic panel of expert speakers in conversation with Rabbi Yael Splansky. Our panel will be introduced shortly. A word about our sponsor and partners. We are grateful this webinar is presented in sponsorship by the Women of Holy Blossom Temple. We are most pleased to be partnered nationally with the Reformed Jewish Community of Canada, and we will hear from Rabbi Dara Lithwick, chair of the Reformed Community's Tikkun Olam Steering Committee, later in the program. We are also pleased to partner across North America with Women of Reformed Judaism. And if you are joining us from outside of Toronto or outside of Canada, we especially welcome you to this webinar and to Holy Blossom Temple. Before we get started with the panel, I want to recognize that today, September 19th, 2022, has been a national and provincial day of mourning for the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, who was the head of state for Canada during her 70-year reign. Praying for the leadership of the country in which Jews live dates back to at least the 1st century CE. We therefore acknowledge the Queen's passing and offer consolation to her mourners. Now I welcome my Women's Advocacy Group co-chair, Megan Stevens, for some further words of acknowledgement and introduction of our speakers. Megan.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. And I have the honor of introducing our speakers tonight. Before I do that, however, I also want to take a moment to acknowledge both the lands on which I'm grateful to be living, working, and gathering with you tonight, as well as the people who were here caring for this land and its inhabitants for years before us. That acknowledgement feels like it carries particular significance today as people around the world are mourning the death of Queen Elizabeth II, but also really reflecting on our colonial legacy that the institution of the crown played in displacing Indigenous people from their lands here in Canada and in many places around the world. Both Holy Blossom Temple and my home, from where I'm joining you tonight, are situated in Toronto, the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Ojibwe Chippewa, and the Huron-Wendat peoples. Under the Dish with One Spoon and Two-Row Wampum Belt Covenant, many Indigenous nations agreed to peaceably share and care for the land and welcomed others to do the same. This land is now home to many diverse communities, including First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people from across Turtle Island. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I recognize, however, that the signatories to that treaty came from unequal positions of power. Treaties have contributed to the problematic history of settlement that we are challenged to confront today. On a personal level, as we head into the High Holy Days, I commit to taking time to reflect upon my role in the continued oppression of Indigenous peoples in Canada and what I can do to center their needs in my reconciliation work. I'm grateful tonight for the opportunity to gather on this land, some of you virtually, all of you virtually, I guess, and strengthen our community as Rabbi Splansky, our senior rabbi at Holy Blossom, leads our panel of distinguished speakers in this timely discussion. Before I turn things over to Rabbi Splansky, I want to sort of give you a brief sketch of how we're planning for the night to go, as well as then briefly introduce our three fantastic speakers. So Rabbi Splansky is going to moderate the discussion until about 8:35, so about an hour. And then we're going to save some time for some questions and answers. We're hoping if you have questions you want answered that you will use the Q&A function that you can see at the bottom of the screen if you toggle down on your Zoom screen. Pop your question into there and we will all be keeping an eye on those, and Rabbi Splansky will help to keep the conversation going with your questions at the end. And then we're going to end the evening with some reflections from Rabbi Lithwick. So I want to start off with some introductions of our speakers. Dr. Martha Painter is a registered nurse and a professor at the University of New Brunswick. She works in abortion and reproductive health care. Among other things, Martha is the founder of Wellness Within, an organization for health and justice. She's also recently written a book, which is on my reading list, From Abortion to Abolition, that came out in spring of this year. And it looks at the history of abortion decriminalization and advocacy efforts to improve access to Canada. Certainly a timely publication that I think you should all think about getting. Next is Kat Owens. Kat is a lawyer who, if you were on earlier, you will hear we've known each other a long time. She has degrees both from the University of Toronto and NYU, and she's been a lawyer at the Women's Legal Education and Action Fund, better known as LEAF, since 2019. And she's currently the project director for the Reproductive Justice Project. As part of that project, Kat is responsible for exploring how to advance reproductive justice across Canada, particularly through LEAF's branches, which exist in many of the Canadian provinces. And finally, last but not least, we have Rabbi Emily Langoids, who is joining us tonight from Phoenix. She is the Jewish Engagement and Learning Manager at the Union for Reform Judaism. She is the co-author of Abortion and Reproductive Justice, a Jewish Perspective in the Social Justice Torah Commentary. And she lives in Phoenix, Arizona, where abortion is still legal, but restricted in a variety of ways. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Rabbi Splansky to get our discussion started. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining, and thank you, Cheryl and Megan, for your leadership. Truly, this is an important evening and a timely discussion. Not only timely because of the news of the day, but also because of the Jewish calendar. So I'd like to just set the frame for a moment before we jump in to our panel discussion. I want to call attention to something quite remarkable about the High Holy Days. The rabbis who give us the texts of Torah and Haftarah and give us the prayers for our Machzor, our High Holiday prayer book, make sure that these days are filled with references to something very intimate, and that has to do with conception. In fact, one name for Rosh Hashanah is we declare through the High Holiday prayer book, Hayom Harat Olam. This is the day that the entire universe was conceived. That was the rabbis doing, giving that name, that metaphor to the Jewish New Year. So out of all the Torah and Haftarah readings that the rabbis could have assigned to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, they chose very intimate stories about the complexities of fertility and infertility, which in the ancient biblical world was their only way of talking about reproductive rights. So on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, we read from Genesis 21 about Sarah and Abraham and Hagar and all of the train wreck of the relationships around fertility and infertility. Sarah and Hagar, neither one had reproductive rights, neither one had protections for reproductive justice. And the rabbis put those texts right in front of us on such a holy day. Similarly, on Rosh Hashanah first day, we have the Haftarah about Hannah, who is desperate to have a child, and she goes to a holy place and she prays. And she prays in a way where no sound comes out of her mouth, only her lips are moving. And the high priest there, Eli, scolds her and takes her for a drunkard, thinks she's out of her mind, that she's not speaking clearly, that she doesn't really know what she needs or what she wants. And she explains, I know exactly what I need and exactly what I want, and I'm not drunk. I've come to pour out my heart to God. And the rabbis say, out of all the models, all the biblical models for how to pray with sincerity, they point to Hannah. And they say she was the one who knew most of all what it was to pray. And then finally, I'd like to call attention to the Haftarah, the Torah and the Haftarah for Yom Kippur. In Reform congregations like ours on Yom Kippur morning, we read from Parashat Nitzavim, which includes the famous phrase, Uvacharta b'chaim lema'an tichya, you shall choose life so that you might really live. Now, many fundamentalist Christians take up this phrase, choose life, and turn it into a battle cry against abortion rights. But we have to understand the Jewish context. Choose life means choose when you are a human being, when you are a full human being, you should choose life whenever you can. And according to Jewish law, and we're going to hear more of this soon from Rabbi Langoids, I'm sure, an embryo, a fetus, an unborn child is not considered to be a full life yet. It's the potential for life, and the potential for life must be treated carefully, but it does not yet have the rights and responsibilities of a full human being. So when the Torah says choose life, it's referring to the life of the mother. It's referring to the life of any human being who is already alive and breathing in this world. And finally, the Haftarah for Yom Kippur comes from Isaiah, and I think we can all take inspiration from his words now. He says, cry out with a full throat, do not hold back. Let your voice resound like a shofar. If you remove lawlessness from your midst, the pointing finger, the malicious word, if you give yourself to satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall shine in the darkness, and your night will become bright as noon. This is the kind of justice we seek. This is the kind of full-throated call that is required for this day, for this moment in our history. So without further ado, let's turn to our distinguished panel of guests and scholars and leaders of our time. So we want to lay some groundwork. First of all, in this post-Roe world, we're hearing many different stories, and it's hard to keep them straight. So I'd like to hear from our panelists, first of all, what you know to be true and current about safe abortion south of the border. It's important for us to know also where we stand in Canada. So first, Kat, if we can, what is the current state of the law in Canada regarding access to safe abortion here in Canada?
Thank you so much for the question, Rabbi Slinsky, and thank you as well for inviting me to be here and join you this evening. I'm also, like Megan, calling in from Toronto, and I'm very pleased to be here. So In terms of the current legal regulation of abortion in Canada, there's really two types of abortion that we're looking at. And so the first is an aspiration abortion, or some folks will also refer to it as surgical abortion. And that is a healthcare procedure to end a pregnancy. And where the way that that is regulated is as a clinical procedure. And so, like for all other clinical procedures, healthcare providers are required to follow established standards of practice in providing aspiration abortion care. And then the other type of abortion is medication abortion. And so that form of abortion ends a pregnancy by using two different kinds of medication, similarly to an induced miscarriage. And the way that that is regulated in Canada is as a health product. So similar to other forms of drugs, either prescription or non-prescription. And in the case of medication abortion, it's regulated as a Schedule I drug, which means that you require a prescription from a healthcare provider in order to get access to medication abortion. So that's sort of a high level picture of how abortion is regulated here.
Thank you so much. And maybe I should have said at the beginning, if at any time during the evening our conversation is triggering for any of our listeners tonight, I just want to reassure you that your rabbis and your physicians and other healthcare providers, as well as social workers, are here to support you. And if you should have any follow-up questions or any need for emotional support, we are here for you. So now that we've heard at a high level about the law here in Canada, I'd love to know more about the realities of access to reproductive health here in Canada. So Martha, if you could tell us from your perspective, please, as a healthcare provider, how easy or difficult is it to have access to reproductive health care?
Thank you, Rabbi Slansky. I'm joining you from what's known as New Brunswick, the land of the Mi'kmaq, Passamaquoddy, and Wolastoqey people. So our access really is like most healthcare things. It depends on where you live, and it depends on the training of the people who live near you. One of the things that has really shifted access in Canada very dramatically was the approval by Health Canada of mifepristone, mifepristone, the brand name, the medication abortion product. So when that was approved in 2015 and made widely available in 2017, it totally changed what could happen, because any primary care provider, any family physician, any nurse practitioner could write a script, and that'd be that. And we have seen an absolutely exponential increase in the number of people who have become prescribers. Our research out of the contraception and abortion research team out of UBC that I'm a part of has shown not only like 20-fold increase in the number of providers in 5 years, but also an increase in the number of surgical providers in response to the normalization of abortion as part of primary care, as part of family practice, that has made the experience more acceptable, more comprehensible for more providers. So we're seeing that improve as well. So really, the situation remains that if you live far from a provider, however, that distance has changed, like I said, so much in 5 years. That's the issue. And what we can do to improve that, we can't make Canada any smaller. So what we can do is improve the dispersion of providers by making sure that medication and aspiration or surgical abortion are required, normal, routine parts of our nursing and medicine education across the country. And we're seeing efforts that's happening. So things are really looking up.
Thank you so much. I'm already learning so much this evening. We're so lucky to have this panel of experts. So, Rabbi Langoids, as you heard these two initial responses about life here in Canada, can you tell us, how does this compare to the challenges that you're seeing currently in the US in relation to abortion access?
Well, as I heard that final sentence of things are looking up here, I thought, I'm sorry I have to follow this to talk about how things are here. But I want to talk quickly on sort of a broader level of what's going on in the United States and why it's happening that way. And then I'll speak from where I am in Arizona, which has, I think it's very representative of some of the chaos that's kind of stewing in the country right now around what the laws really are and what's going on. So on the broadest of levels, the United States, the way that sort of legal things are decided in our country, there's this balancing between the federal government and the rights of the states to make legal decisions. And there's a strong bend towards giving states the rights to, choose the laws that they see fit, unless there's some kind of right that is protected for all people federally, constitutionally. So in 1973, when the case Roe v. Wade was decided, that was a federal protection for abortion to be legal up to a certain point. And what I think, the focus has been on this Dobbs decision, this recent Dobbs decision, which basically struck down the findings in Roe. But something to keep in mind is that this has been sort of a strange, murky landscape from 1973 until today, because some states have very strong protections for abortion's legality, are increasing protections for abortion's legality, and have been doing so while Roe was still active. And some states, even while Roe was active, were sort of peeling back the layers of how that legality could actually be applied. So for example, here in Arizona, though currently, until the judge assigned to the case sometime this week decides what's going on for us, we actually currently have legal abortion up to the point of viability. So I think right now the state puts that at about 24 weeks. But because of both the pre-Dobbs legal situation with targeted regulation or restriction of abortion providers that sort of keep clinics from being able to function as well, the fact that we have only 3 large cities in the state with abortion providers, so everyone in different parts of the state who's not close to them wasn't having access. We have a 24-hour waiting period, so someone would have to go in for a consult, come back 24 hours later to receive their abortion care. We have restrictions on minors receiving abortion care. The list goes on. And so that was before the Dobbs decision even happened. And since the Dobbs decision, both in Arizona and I think in many states where there are attempts to restrict abortion access, there has been a lot of confusion on the part both of people seeking care and also providers. So in Arizona, for example, we had our legislature pass a 15-week ban in this most recent legislative session, which would go into effect, there's a certain amount of time after the session ends, so it would go into effect on September 24th, which is in 5 days. But once Dobbs was decided, there is also, we don't have a trigger ban, which is a ban passed post-Roe to once Roe is overturned, sort of ban abortion. We have what they call a zombie law, which is a law that was passed pre-Roe. And this law actually was passed before Arizona was a state in the 1860s. And it criminalizes as a felony the providing of abortion care, the receiving of abortion care, and the assisting of abortion care. And so there is currently nobody in the state really knows which law is in effect. And a judge will be deciding this week on whether we will have the 15-week ban enforced or if we'll have the territorial law enforced. And so even though, as you said in the introduction, I live in Arizona where abortion is still legal, all of the confusion, along with all of the restrictions that had already existed, are having a really chilling effect. So for several weeks after the Dobbs decision, nobody was providing abortion care because nobody knew what was going on in the state. And since then, certain clinics have started to provide care, but only up to 15 weeks, knowing that law is about to potentially be enforced. And some are providing, most are providing only medical abortion care as opposed to also surgical abortion care. So it's mostly a lot of chaos, and it's having real implications on people's lives every single day. And state to state, it looks different depending on what the state legislatures are deciding. So that is the state of things here on the ground in the United States.
Thank you. I hope at the end of the evening, we'll have a chance to talk about our responsibility in Canada to support women in the United States. So I'd like to also, just at the beginning of the conversation, lay the foundation of the vocabulary that we use and why it matters. Much of the concern post-Roe has been specifically around abortion access. And yet there are many advocates who look to broaden the focus of the discussion and use broader language like reproductive rights or reproductive justice. So Kat, in your project, you use that term very often, reproductive justice. Can you tell us, please, what do you mean by it? And why is it important to introduce that term?
Absolutely. Thanks for the question. So the idea of reproductive justice has a really long and rich history. It's something that we see Indigenous women, Black women, racialized women, and trans people have long fought for before there was sort of the formal term reproductive justice. Folks will point to a conference in 1994 in Chicago as sort of the originating moment of the term reproductive justice, or at least where we know of it coming about. And so this was a group of Black women gathered in Chicago before a major international conference, and they were understandably feeling quite dissatisfied isn't a strong enough word, left out, abandoned by the broader reproductive rights and women's movement, quote unquote, which was seen as really centering the needs of middle class and wealthy white women and leaving a lot of women, trans people out of that sort of advocacy. And so they came together and they wanted to create a movement that would reflect the needs of members of marginalized communities and center those and put their needs front and center. And so at this conference, the term reproductive justice was really coined. And so at Leaf, for this project, what we're really looking to do is acknowledge that history, learn from it, and also build on it through our work. And so we understand reproductive justice to basically mean that every person is able to make their own choices about whether they want to have or not have children, that they're able to have access to sexual and reproductive health care, so services like birth control, abortion, assisted reproduction technologies, and sex education, proper care during pregnancy, during childbirth, and after birth as well. And it's also not just about sort of the immediate pre and postnatal moments, but also thinking more broadly about how do we let people live in conditions where they can raise the families that they have and be a family in conditions that are dignified, that meet their basic needs, and that allow them to have the supports that they need to raise their families and parent with dignity. And so I think of it in some ways as, I think, because conversations like this where we talk about abortion access are really important, because abortion access is something that we need to fight for and to have be normalized in the way that Martha was talking about, and to guard against restrictions like what we're seeing happening in the United States. But it's really about trying to broaden the conversation and hear the really fair critique that focusing exclusively on abortion really leaves the needs of a lot of women, trans, and non-binary people out, and thinking about how we can really look at reproductive justice, reproductive health in a really holistic manner.
Thank you. And Martha, maybe you could add your perspective to the same question, because in your book's title, you refer to reproductive health and justice. So I'm sure you were very deliberate in choosing that language. Tell us why.
Thank you. The book really is a response to what I observe in practice, that people in Canada believe that there are restrictions in place that are not in place. And so trying to overcome this greater familiarity with Roe among Canadians than with our own history and our own status quo. So that was sort of the beginning impetus. And then the shadow side of that is that we don't know our good history, and we also don't seem to know our ugliness, and also perhaps the things that have been overcome in those domains as well. So for instance, it's improving, but very poor recognition of how we have a state project of genocide against Indigenous people. And in the era before, that was manifested through the residential school regime, and it's currently manifested through the foster care system, where 52% of the kids in foster care in Canada are Indigenous. Obviously a hyper carceral response. And then the other big domain is our prison system, where over 50% of the women in the prison system are Indigenous. So we have these other state tools to control and limit families and reproduction for specific people, a truly genocidal project. So, and of course, there have been very important efforts to resist those state functions, and that's a lot of what my book talks about. But that's my rallying cry to people in Canada to understand abortion is not criminally sanctioned in any way at all. There's no gestational age limit. There's no requirement for parental consent. There's no waiting periods. There's no nothing. All that you are limited by is whether your provider is trained. Meanwhile, there are a lot of very severe state restrictions and machinations against Indigenous people.
Thank you for connecting those dots for us. It's that part of the story is not often told. Let's turn to more of the Jewish perspective in particular. Rabbi Langoids, you cite in a recent article the 2014 Pew study that found that 83% of Jews believe that abortion should be legal in all or most cases. And we know that much of the push against Roe in the US is coming from the Christian right. And it could be that Judaism as a religious tradition stands uniquely in support of abortion rights. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more, just again, laying the groundwork. What are some of the basic truths that we should know about the halachic frame, the Jewish legal frame for our approach, our Jewish approach to abortion and reproductive rights?
Yes, and of course, this could take up hours and hours of our time. So I'll give us a brief overview. And I want to mention that that survey was, of course, of, from United States. That was a survey run in the United States, and that 83% is the highest number among all of the folks who were surveyed. We're 1% up on the Buddhists, who are at 82%, and also ahead of folks who are of no religion. So those were in third. So I've always found that to be particularly interesting because, like you said, the rhetoric, especially in the United States, is one that assumes that the religious voice is monolithic and it exists only on one side of the argument. And so part of the work the reason that the work I do feels so important to me is to remind people that there are people of faith and religious voices that have really different perspectives and understandings. So, one thing I always caveat when I talk about, well, what does Judaism have to say? is first of all, Judaism never has one thing to say, as we know. And second of all, that we modern Jews are working in a really sacred and beautiful way with texts from across our history. And part of that is incredible that those texts have been carried with us for so long. But also we need to be mindful when we look at those texts, when they came from, where they came from, and who the authoritative voices were that created those texts. And I think particularly around the question of abortion in Jewish law, Jewish texts, is that for thousands of years, the authoritative voice around those texts was not the voice of a person who could become pregnant. I'd like to sort of keep that in mind as we look at some of these things, because part of what feels important to me is to think about, especially as a Reform Jew, where when I think about how do I want to practice Shabbat, I don't say, well, I've got to follow exactly what halakha says, exactly what that's always said. I sort of take the text, I take my own experiences, I take my own values. Can I use electricity to call my 93-year-old grandfather in Massachusetts on Shabbat? Yes, I should do that because that value takes precedent for me. So I think the same principles should be applied in how we look at Jewish texts around abortion and reproduction. I think often we're maybe scared to be engaging in the same kind of dialogue that we might with other texts, but everyone does that. That's the Jewish project. So very briefly, the sort of original text in the Torah that frames the discussion on abortion in Judaism comes from Exodus 21 verses 22 to 23, and it talks about, it's a piece of case law about if two men are fighting in the marketplace and one of them accidentally pushes a pregnant woman, what should result? And they give two options. One is that there's a miscarriage, but that the woman herself lives. And in that case, there's a monetary fine assigned to the perpetrator, and it's paid to the husband. Again, keep in mind sort of where the texts are coming from. And the second case is that the woman herself dies. And the text then says the punishment for the perpetrator will be nefesh tachat nefesh. As Rabbi Splinsky, as you said at the beginning, this question of what constitutes a full-fledged being. So this text, which of course has nothing to do with abortion, because back when it was written, nobody knew from our medical procedures around abortion, but it's about the loss of pregnancy. And it sets up the much longer, broader Jewish discussion that I won't get into about what the status of potential life in the womb is versus the status of the person carrying the pregnancy. And because of the difference in punishments, one being a monetary fine, one being capital punishment, there's this ground understanding that the pregnant person has the status of a nefesh, a full-fledged person, whereas the fetus in utero has not yet gained that status. And there's lots of texts that go on to talk about, where's the line and what kind of things have to go on, and there's plenty to talk about there. But Judaism at its core understands that there's some kind of differentiation in status, and then the discussion really is about the question of what are the circumstances that would require the termination of the pregnancy. And I'll say one final thing, which is that for many of us, perhaps, that might not feel like enough, because it's still looking for, there's a Reverend Rebecca Todd Peters wrote a book called Trust Women, which is about sort of the question of reproductive rights from a Christian perspective. And she talks about moving from a justification paradigm to a justice paradigm. And so even though Jewish texts can be quite permissive, there's still the word permissive there. There's still this sense of looking for some kind of justification or permission as to why a certain reasoning for an abortion or a certain type of abortion would be appropriate. And so I always encourage people to sort of expand the sense of what Jewish values do we look to when we think about these things. We just asking the question about status. We also thinking about what is a just world, you know, or we thinking about what are our obligations as parents to children and how do we want that to play out in our lives? Or what are our obligations to choosing life, as you said, and what does that actually mean for the pregnant people themselves? So that's in a nutshell the scope of the Jewish conversation on abortion.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. We're really, we're just scratching the surface. Any one of these topics deserves a whole evening of itself, and we can look forward to future learning together. We're hearing more about the Jewish legal categories. For the next question, we'd like to hear more about the Canadian legal categories. And for that, I'd like to invite back to the screen Megan Stevens.
So thank you, Rabbi Splansky. I really just want to sort of frame the discussion in terms of helping us think a bit about how, when lawyers frame arguments that get before the courts, how it can sometimes really have an impact down the road on what that means for all of us. And I think we see that both in the decision everyone knows about, Roe versus Wade, and the 1973 decision from the Supreme Court of the United States, as well as in the Canadian decision that essentially, you know, decriminalized access to abortion in this country, which is the 1988 Supreme Court of Canada decision in Morgentaler. And both of these decisions, it's interesting and have been subject to some critique, because even though I think many of us think about reproductive health as very much an issue of human equality, that's not how either court ultimately chose to frame the issue. And to be fair to the lawyers who presented the arguments, at least as I know the arguments that were presented before the Supreme Court of Canada, equality was part of the proverbial pitch to the court. In the Canadian case, it was in Canada, what was at issue were the criminal restrictions on abortion access. And it was framed alternatively as a violation of the charter right to life, liberty, and security of the person, so Section 7 of the Canadian Charter, and also Section 15, a violation of the right to equality. In Canada, we know the law was struck down. The majority of the court agreed that those restrictions were a violation of charter rights, but they framed it as being in relation to a violation of Section 7, life, liberty, security of the person. And they chose not to deal with Section 15, which is also not a shocking thing that judges do. Judges are very conservative. They want to decide cases narrowly. What's interesting, I think, about the Morgentaler decision is that the only judge who talked about equality was actually Justice Wilson, Justice Bertha Wilson, who was the first woman appointed to the Supreme Court of Canada, and also the only woman on the Supreme Court of Canada at that time. And her judgment did talk about equality, but it also really focused on human dignity. And making connections between the Section 7 right to security of the person and human dignity. The decision in Roe versus Wade also did not focus on the equal protection guarantee. Instead, the focus was on rooting the right to abortion in the right of privacy, which the majority of the court found was stemmed from the idea of personal liberty and restrictions upon state action, but not that equal protection guarantee. And that the decision in Roe has been open to criticism for years because of that, including by Justice Ginsburg and speeches that she gave. And a lot of people felt that opened the door to what happened in Dobbs. But to me, I think talks a bit about how sometimes the decisions of our courts don't necessarily resonate in the language of how we understand certain rights. And I think that the language of equality and dignity is one that many of us think about when we're thinking about reproductive justice more broadly.
Thank you so much. So building on these themes, let's turn to Rabbi Langoids and see if you can describe for us about this language of equality or dignity. Do those terms, do those factors come into play from a Jewish perspective?
I think, when thinking about those categories, of course, if we think about the equality piece or equity piece, we could turn to many, many Jewish texts about the importance of justice, the importance of empathy, in the importance of caring for those who have less power, right? The sort of classical phrase is the widow, the stranger, and the orphan. And we might apply that to the landscape that's being described tonight. But that dignity piece also makes me think about the creation story, and how in the creation story, Genesis 1:27, human beings are described as in the divine image. And I think like with that piece that you quoted from Deuteronomy, some people might take that to mean, well, if all human beings are created in the divine image, wouldn't that be an argument against access to abortion? And because all human beings are sacred, and that idea. But we know that Judaism doesn't really understand that piece of full-fledged humanness while in the womb. And also we might think of it as a way of dignifying people in their creative acts. And we know from the creation story that God acts in certain ways while creating that are sort of our divine blueprint for what it means for us to be creative beings and create life. And some of the key things that God does is God stops and discerns at the end of every day, looks around and says, is this good? And there are actually midrashim in Jewish tradition about God creating and unmaking worlds before settling on ours. That there are stories where it wasn't good, and actually the world got undone and then redone again. And I like to encourage people to think about, what if we saw ourselves in that image of God, that when we take creative acts like bringing a child into the world, we too deserve to assess and say, is it good? Is it very good? And know when it should stop. And I think that to me feels like a very high form of dignity to treat people who are bringing life into the world in that created image of the divine, in the way that our stories tell us the divine creates.
Thank you so much. I love that teaching about the dignity of discernment. Thank you. And Martha and Kat, what would you say? How can you broaden this conversation for us when talking about human rights and dignity vis-a-vis abortion rights and healthcare justice?
You want to go first, Kat? You want me to go? I approach this so much as a clinician, as a provider, right? And so when you're doing this care, it feels very dignified. It feels it's very satisfying work. It's incredibly satisfying work. And I think that that's why, as people have more permission within the regulatory regime of prescriptions in Canada, it is such an attractive thing to bring into your practice, because you can change the course of a person's life literally with a couple of tablets. And that's profound and simple. Yeah, I think one of the ways that the conversation about abortion is changing, and where one of the ways that we as clinicians need to maybe push ourselves or almost extricate ourselves is that we're really moving towards this language of self-management. And globally, while Canada has the best access in the world on paper, we're, again, very, very big country, so that's a problem, but on paper, best access in the world. But around the world, there's a lot more experience with this use of abortion medication as the way you take care of yourself, as the way you maintain your own dignity. And it's not reliant on clinical engagement. So that's one of the ways that I think even though I am a clinician, I see that we perhaps need to take our egos out of it and think about all the ways that not only is the having of the abortion and the consequence of governing your life, of course, that's important and that's dignified, but there's also the how you go about doing this that has power in it. And there is dignity in doing this for yourself and doing it by yourself at your house. So that's a way that the whole discourse or the way we talk about this or think about this is changing in Canada, late to the game, because Canada is so late to medication abortion. Anyway, we don't have to get into all the reasons for that, but they've had medication abortion for decades and decades in Europe and Asia, and we're old. We're like really late. We're late. Anyway, so that's what I thought of.
Thank you so much. It reminds me of one rabbinic legal opinion that a fetus is an extension of the body of the pregnant person, and they liken it to a limb, right? So that agency, that the living person gets to decide how to care for her limb, right? How to take care of her body. And I think what you're describing as a practitioner, and boy, your patients are so lucky to have you looking after them. It sounds like you want to give them agency to make these decisions for self-care. Thank you. Kat, last word on this topic.
Yeah, LEAF, the organization that I work at, focuses on advancing substantive equality, which is a legal term. In less legal terms, it's closer to equity, I would say, as we use it commonly for women, girls, trans and non-binary people in Canada. And so under Canada's Constitution, Section 15 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms puts forward the equality guarantee. And so we do a lot of work advocating under that. And I think it's important from that perspective to think about this as an equality issue because it helps sort of illuminate what's going on in the individual cases, but it also puts it within the broader system. So in the context, say, of abortion access, when we look at the individual right to abortion or the ability to access abortion, it's a gendered experience. The majority of abortions are sought by women and girls, although trans and non-binary people who get pregnant also seek abortions, and it's important to remember that. And so when we see access restrictions put on access to abortions or barriers not successfully removed, that can worsen existing inequalities. So I think about when Martha talks about the reality that Canada is a big country, and that means that people may live far from providers or may only live near providers without sufficient training. Those are some barriers that can exist. Or if you look in the US context, obviously, where criminalization of abortion comes in, that creates massive inequalities for people. But when we look at sort of more broadly, if we think about access to abortion as a healthcare issue, we know that our healthcare systems are influenced by a lot of oppressive systems. We're talking about sexism, racism, anti-indigeneity, transphobia. All of these things influence the way that people are able to access reproductive healthcare, that they're able to operate in society more broadly. And so I think when we think about things from an equality perspective, we're trying to understand how does this particular issue fit into how people navigate the world more broadly, and what oppressive systems are impacting them, and where we need to push back. And so I think that's why the equality rights lens is really important.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone at home is able to absorb all of the wisdom that's coming through the screen tonight. Let's shift our conversation now to talk about advocacy. I know many people are asking quietly or out loud, what can I do? What should I do? So Kat, we've heard calls in Canada for the need to advocate for a law that would guarantee the right to abortion. Do you see that as necessary or useful? And is there any potential downside to such a law?
And I'm sure, I know, in fact, that Martha has thoughts on this as well, but so I'd welcome those too. But I would say no. I can understand where the impulse comes from when you see something that happens in the US. People are understandably upset, and they look at this and they say, okay, well, we need to make sure that we have this in Canada, it's enshrined as a right. But I think to go back to what Martha talked about earlier, access on paper in Canada in terms of the way abortion is regulated is the best in the world. And so the danger that sometimes that we don't think about of reopening a debate or sort of widening the framing with which this debate can happen is, well, are we going to politicize this form of healthcare, this form of pharmacological care in the case of medication abortion? Are we going to potentially provide a foothold for anti-abortion politicians who have tried to limit access to abortion in Canada? And are we really sort of distracting from the broader picture? Maybe there's an opportunity to have a feel-good moment where the feds enact a law with a right to protect abortion. But are you doing things, like Martha said, to improve the incorporation of abortion and surgical and medical abortion in training for all healthcare providers? Are you improving access for people who live in rural or remote areas? Are you improving access to reproductive and sexual healthcare more broadly? And I think those are the things where we would be better served to put our sort of political and advocacy capital, as opposed to looking at something like legislating a formal right to abortion, at least in the Canadian context. And the last thing I would just say is, again, obviously, like, the focus on abortion is really important, but we want to look more broadly and think about the ways to help people raise children in dignity. So are we going to expand parental leave eligibility? Are we going to look at the disproportionate care labor that has to be done by women in particular, and think about things like expanding childcare? We're going to improve the supports that are needed for people to move out of poverty, look at the way that the state criminalizes Indigenous and Black folks in Canada in particular. All of those sorts of conversations, which are more difficult than just passing a law that says there's a right to an abortion, but are really important.
Thank you. And Martha, what would you say are the priorities for advocacy around reproductive health care in Canada?
I write about this a lot. First, I'll respond to this one thing about the law. And Kat and I have worked together for years, and I love her, but I am not a lawyer, right? And so clinicians do not want to talk about the law when we are doing care. We don't want to. Love you guys, love you, but we don't want to. So if you make something legal, you introduce the need to have a legal conversation in your clinical appointment. That will make the providers that we have gained run to the hills. They will quit. So no, that will practically ruin everything from a pragmatic, practical way. Okay, next topic. What do we need to do? So we need to do, I always talk about the 3 top things. The first thing is we absolutely have to have pharmacare, totally free, universal coverage for contraception. The fact that we don't have this is absolutely ridiculous. It's terrible from an economic perspective, from a moral perspective. It's super impractical, absolutely dumb. We've been promised it by politician after politician. It's a doable thing. Do it. Number 1. Number 2, we do need to improve the the education of providers, like I said, but even more important is improving the education, the sexual health knowledge and confidence of people, so that they know what to ask for, they know it's normal, they know they can get it, they know how to get it, they know where to get it. And really think hard about, why do we have some of the restrictions? You know, Kat mentioned somebody who's not trained well enough. Well, is it really as hard as we think it is? And then the last thing is, people need money. That's what people need. That's the fundamental problem with equity. You can't make a clinician live in, I don't know, Heartland, New Brunswick. You can't make her do it. But you can provide the patient with the financial basic dignity that she can get to Heartland. So that's what we need. Yeah.
Thank you. So Rabbi Langoids, as a representative of the US perspective on this, we hear so many frightful stories now. What would you say ought to be the priority for advocacy and activism now?
I think, something to think about is, though it felt like 50 years of established constitutional rights were stripped away in one day, as I mentioned, it's been a longer process to get to the point of Dobbs. And so if we have any hope of turning the needle the other way again, it's going to be a long process. We're not just going to flip it back overnight. And we also don't know if this is the end of the needle. I think that's the scariest piece for people living in the United States right now, is that this is not us going back to a pre-Roe reality. This is us going to a post-Dobbs reality, which actually feels much scarier, in that, there is severe restriction being passed, there's severe criminalization being passed, and there's also now other rights up on the table. Megan mentioned that the Roe decision lived in the right to privacy, which sort of lives in a few different amendments in the Constitution. And this Supreme Court, could potentially, if given the chance, start to look at other rights that live in the right to privacy, which includes the right to gay marriage, includes the right to access contraception, includes the right to interracial marriage. Even all of those decisions live in the right to privacy. So it's I would say, call your American friends first and foremost, and just give them a cheerful, just listen, because it does feel at sometimes quite bleak, especially if you're living, as I am, in a state that's quite restrictive. I think what Martha said at the end there about financial support, that is a huge piece here as well, especially because not only do people need support for transportation in Arizona, they need it potentially over multiple days because of the waiting period. They also need it to pay for their procedures, because in the United States, these procedures are not allowed to be covered because of the Hyde Amendment by public funds. So nobody on the public healthcare options, nobody can pay for the procedure themselves. And it could be hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for people. So there's a national network of abortion funds, nnaf.org. I encourage people to donate to those. And yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on what Canadians can do about American policy. So I think continuing to sort of be apprised of what's going on here, continuing to reach out to people living in the United States, to offer your money if you can. And also on a general level, for me, it always feels important to continue talking about your stories, and talking about your stories from a Jewish place, because all of these dystopian stories are not happening, just on a television screen. They're happening in people's real lives, and they're not people you don't know. 1 in 4 American women has an abortion in her lifetime. And I have a poster here, you can't really see it, but it says, everyone loves someone who has had an abortion. And sometimes we forget that because maybe there's so much shame built around it, especially here, that people don't tell those stories, or we feel like they don't belong in religious spaces. We're not sure how to have the conversation. But I think just speaking with the people you love about your reproductive life is powerful, more powerful than you might know. And helps, that's how these conversations, that's how the next 50 years, that's how we might sort of start to make some shifts, I hope.
So a follow-up question to that, what are you seeing among American synagogues, Reform congregations and otherwise? How are they mobilizing state by state?
So some are actually looking at legal questions. Our Supreme Court is very interesting right now in that there's also been a lot of religious liberty cases in front of our Supreme Court, and they seem to be quite permissive about a lot of things. So one question that people are bringing forward is there potentially a line of legal reasoning around religious freedom and the question of access to abortion? So there are some congregations or local chapters of National Council for Jewish Women or other Jewish organizations working with people like the ACLU or the Center for Reproductive Rights around, can we bring some test cases forward around religious exemptions to the kind of laws that are being passed. My wife is a civil rights attorney, and she is skeptical of the possibility of that line of legal reasoning, but I think some congregations are choosing to see how they can sort of put their support there and see what comes of it. And I think, again, having space for people to talk about these issues, I think people are doing a lot more around educating themselves Jewishly, so that when they have conversations with others, they can say, I understand where my tradition comes from, educating themselves. A lot of people don't know, I find when I teach about Judaism and abortion, people don't really know a lot about the abortion part, let alone the Judaism part. And so often it's about just people educating themselves. The rhetoric here is so intense and so extreme, and people turn on the news and they see all this language that is not actually an accurate representation of what we're talking about. So often people just need the space, and synagogues, I think, are safe spaces for people to have these conversations, to talk about what actually is an abortion. What does abortion care look like? What does it look like in the United States? So I think that's what many folks are doing, financial support, legal attempts, education, and a lot of this is also going to be decided on the state level. So though congregations, I think, are limited in their ability to, say, advocate for one candidate or another, that will be a big piece of what access looks like in the states going forward. And there are some states that could swing different ways, and that will dramatically change the possibility for what is accessible in those states. So I think for folks who are looking for ways to be involved on an individual level, I think also getting involved in your local political process is a really great place to be around advocacy too.
Thank you. So let's talk about here north of the border. The anti-abortion movement in Canada is growing stronger. This is our final question for the evening, and then we'll turn to questions from participants. So Kat and Martha, if you could give us your wish. You have a captive audience here, and we would love some direction about what advocacy we should be taking up and what next steps for reproductive justice.
I can give a couple ideas and then turn it over to Martha. I mean, I think that like Rabbi Langoids mentioned, having conversations about your own experiences, the experience of others, learning more, always very important. I have learned so much since starting this project through getting to work with people like Martha, and that is really, I think, powerful. I'll also speak to the value of donating your time, donating your money to causes. There's a lot of great organizations in Toronto that work to advance reproductive justice. I think about some like the Call Auntie Clinic, which do a lot of work with Indigenous pregnant people, providing doula care, providing reproductive health care that's sort of centered in Indigenous traditions, which is great. And I think about really pushing for meaningful reforms, not just in the context of reproductive health care, but again, more broadly to things like when we're talking about income supports, decarceration, pushing for the reallocation of funds from policing to other community grounded initiatives. There's the challenge and the benefit, I think, of reproductive justice is that it's such a large tent in terms of ideas and concepts, but the benefit of that is that there's so many different ways that people can get involved in advocating for meaningful change.
Martha.
Yeah, I very much echo all of Kat's ideas. And really, I feel like in Canada, my goal is for people in this country to realize the global leadership that we have in this area. And it's very apparent to me because I get to travel to international conferences and see just how screwed up so many places are. The US certainly wins the prize for this summer, but things are a mess in a lot of places. And Canada has some really good foundation to work from. And so from that foundation, we can do that just expansively compassionate and confident approach to sexual and reproductive health, to care for our communities. We can use the ground that we already have and keep pushing in all these directions to and at the same time do all of that reconciliation work that we absolutely must do to have validity in these equity projects. So
Thank you so much. We're going to move to questions from our participants tonight. We have two good questions that have come through. The first is for Rabbi Langoids, picking up on a story that I know through one of my Holy Blossom colleagues who moved from here to Florida. Rabbi Jason Rosenberg was one of the signatories for some activism there in Florida. So here, the question is about a case several months ago. A synagogue in Palm Beach, Florida, Palm Beach County, sued the state of Florida, challenging the state's anti-abortion law as the law contravenes Jewish legal tradition. You were referencing this earlier. Has there been any momentum as a result of this lawsuit, or have other states, have other congregations and Jewish communities picked up on this model and emulating it?
So I do know about that case in Florida. I have not heard of a lot of other cases from other states of congregations making that choice. Here in Arizona, the local NCJW chapter, National Council of Jewish Women, was part of a suit when the legislature passed a ban. It was sort of two pieces of the law. One was a personhood bill, so designating fetus, embryo, potentially fertilized egg as a person, full-fledged person. And also had a ban around abortion for the reason of genetic anomaly. So NCJW was part of a suit against that. And actually, I think there's currently a stay on a piece of that law because of that suit. So I think it's possible. I think, my wife knows a lot more about constitutional law than I do, but my general sense is in order for something to be sort of defendable around the religious liberty question, it's got to be a sincerely held religious belief. And then there's another piece of it that needs to be applied. So for example, certain sects of the Mormon church have a sincerely held religious belief that bigamy is, part of their religious obligation. But bigamy is not legal in the United States. And therefore there's not really, I think there's, one of the case laws, the big case law around religious liberty is that exactly that question, that it was decided, well, that is sort of a line that we'll draw. So I think many people feel like the same line might get drawn around the question of abortion. But we just don't know. So I think, if people are curious or interested in the idea of what would it look like to pursue that sort of legal course of action, I know that the big sort of players in all of that is the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, and the Center for Reproductive Rights. I think our legal representatives, I know in the Arizona case and possibly in Florida, and also NCJW, I think knows a lot about sort of what's going on legally. So if you were curious about those things and wanted to know more about what that might look like, or if there's other cases in other states, I would reach out to those organizations.
Great, thank you so much. An additional good question has come through. Maybe we'll send this next one to Martha. I think you're in the best position to respond. The question is about improving access. Do you believe that more providers should be trained and permitted, certified to provide abortion services, like midwives, nurse practitioners, and public health nurses?
So they already are. As of 2017, nurse practitioners in every province can prescribe medication abortion, with the exception of Quebec. Midwifery, we're making inroads. Quebec this summer, kind of in response to Roe, authorized midwives to become prescribers. So I think we'll see increasingly forward momentum. The way that operates, though, is the college, this is very weedy, I don't want to get into it too much, but the college needs to do that authorization, right? There isn't some certification that you get to become an abortion prescriber. There isn't a required course. It just has to be within the regulatory regime of the college of your profession, that self-regulating profession that will allow you to do it. So we're doing it. In our study, looks like about 10% of prescribers are nurse practitioners already. And it's just gonna fly. Like, we're already at 30% of abortions are medication. And, there are countries in Europe where it's 99. Because it's so easy, it's so quick, it's so early, it's so this, it's so that. So as we make that shift, and we already know that we have RN prescribing in many of the provinces where it's suitable and appropriate to be prescribing. So we'll continue to see that, and that's absolutely something that I push for. I think the average person, the average Joe and Josephine, can maybe just ask their provider, are you doing this yet? Because I think it's important and you should do it. And that is a pretty powerful question.
Okay, so right there is a piece of advocacy that all of us can take up. Thank you. Let's conclude this final question. Maybe Kath, you can start, and then we'll kick it over to Martha. Is when there are people from the US seeking abortions, if they should choose to come to Canada, how does it play out for them? What's the process? And are there any ramifications for the abortion provider?
I'll defer almost entirely to Martha on this question, just from the clinician perspective. I would say we've heard concerns from folks in Canada if there are, for example, bans that are put in place in the US, or laws that are put in place that provide for either criminal or civil liability for providers outside of that particular state who aid in providing an abortion or provide the abortion care themselves. To the best of my knowledge, which is about a month dated, I haven't looked into it recently, that hasn't happened yet, but that is a legal question. If it does happen, there's a lot of hurdles that would need to happen for someone to be held criminally or civilly responsible for an action taken in a separate country. So there's a lot of hurdles involved there. But again, I will defer to Martha sort of on the more practical questions there.
Well, the practical side of that, though, Kat, is that our regulatory bodies will, or our regulators will protect us, right? Like the Canadian Nurses Protective Agency, the same for the physicians. We have bodies that exist that we pay fees to every year to protect us should anything ever happen to us. And it's because the care we're giving here is protected, right? So I've been asked this question a ton. A lot of people, not many people are coming to Canada for care. They're welcome to come, open arms, we'll have you. We're all working hard to increase capacity, 100%, but it's just too hard to get here. You need a passport. It costs a fortune. Yeah, so people are not coming here. They're going to close states. The one place where we're really wondering, is it going to happen, is North Dakota, just because where are you going to go really? Going north might make sense. If you come to one of us, some people are saying they're going to comp everything that they can. The abortion pills itself cost about $350. So if you don't do any of the other things, and there's lots of protocols to support, for instance, no longer needing any blood tests or ultrasonography and so on and so forth in certain contexts where you're very sure of LMP, last menstrual period, blah, blah, blah. You know, you can make an abortion very cheap. Otherwise it would be about $2,000 just for the usual package out of pocket for the care, right? So what Rabbi Langoids was talking about earlier, there's the travel, but there's also the care. And yeah, care is free in Canada, but not if you don't have a health card for Canada. So in that case, it would be about $2,000. And here in Canada, Action Canada for Sexual and Reproductive Health and NAF, are both the organizations that provide funds to people who need financial support in relation to abortion care. So those are other places to think about putting your donations. Obviously, most of that goes to people who are in Canada, and maybe they're international students whose visas have expired, or anyway, there's all kinds of reasons why people might not have a health card and have to pay for care. But we're not seeing a lot of it. In general, we would welcome them if they did come. That's it.
So as Rabbi Dara Lithwick makes her way onto the screen to wrap up our evening of learning, I just personally want to thank this panel of experts. Each one of you brilliant in your area of expertise, and I learned a ton tonight. I hope everyone who's been participating from home will feel empowered to learn more, to ask more questions, and then to do your part in advocacy as best you can. I understand that this evening session is being recorded and will be made available and shared more widely so others can benefit from your teaching. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to you. Rabbi Lithwick.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, I have all my notes sort of jumbled here. But I just wanted to say thank you to, this was such a beautiful, perfect panel in terms of all the insights and learning that you brought. And I learned a lot too. And Rabbi Spansky, just how you moderated it as well. And Megan, I mean, it was just all the pieces together were wonderful. And so important, because one thing that kept coming up for me over the course of the past hour and a half is that piece, particularly when we think about what we know and what we don't know here in Canada and what's going on in the United States, confusion, disinformation, ignorance, chaos, and the politicization and sort of how to depoliticize reproductive care in an expansive way, just to understand what we're talking about, is something that kept coming up for me. Other pieces that just, I mean, I'm seeing different parts that I circled here. Demystifying, again, all these elements of care, the pathway to reconciliation. I like to think, we are in a period right now, a period of tshuva, we like to say we're sorry, but really it is a period. And I mean, I like to say together, emet and tshuva. Emet is truth. Tshuva can be understood as repentance, but really of reconciliation, and thinking about how do we embody that in what we do, particularly given the challenges here that we see in Canada. The dignity of discernment. And Rabbi Langoids, what you said, everyone loves someone, the poster that sort of, I guess, just outside the frame, everyone loves someone who's had an abortion. And overall also, donating time and money to causes like clinics, providing Indigenous reproductive health care, providing support to organizations here in Canada like NAF, like Action Canada for Sexual and Reproductive Health. In the States, you were mentioning key organizations as well as Jewish organizations like the National Council for Jewish Women, that is so active. I know the Religious Action Center for Reform Judaism also is quite active. And I know I've just heard, because I sit on the Commission for Social Action for the RAC, hearing about also like, different communities being approached to do test cases, and also trying to be a little, to exercise discernment into, whether and how to participate in such cases, and what could be helpful and not helpful. I think the takeaway in terms of what we can do here and what we can do there is just keep learning and educating and talking, and again, telling stories, sharing encounters in those ways. And as we talk, also to listen to those stories as we have tonight, and then act, and then be present in those ways. So thank you so much. I don't want to say anything else. I did have a question. I said this sort of before. I have a shofar because we're in Elul, and in 1 week from now we'll be in 5783. We'll be in the new year, and it's the tradition, every day in the month of Elul to blow the sound of the shofar and to wake us up. It's a sound of justice. So should I go ahead and have with the consent of those gathered? I don't know how the sound will go, through the screen. But also you could think of, this is an interesting shofar, but it's somewhat, it's bent and it's turned, and it's, it also speaks to the work to do to recognize that our world is a little bent, and we all have work to do to heal our world. And the different sounds of the shofar, the sound that I'm going to give is the sound of the tekiah, or the tekiah gdolah. And that's a long, whole sound, if it comes out right. And that's also a sound of justice itself, when we can come together and hope for that better world. So with that, I'll give a tekiah in gratitude and thanks. And then I'll turn it over to Cheryl. Tekiah. So thank you. So the blow of the ram's horn, and for justice and for health. So thank you so much. Thank you so much. And to Cheryl to close us, I think, tonight.
Thank you, Dara. And wow, this has been a very insightful and thought-provoking conversation. I've learned a lot, as we've all said. Thank you to each of our speakers for sharing your time and your expertise with us. We are most grateful. I wanted to also say that we have purchased a copy of the Social Justice Torah Commentary for the Holy Blossom Temple Library, which contains the writings of Rabbi Emily Langoids. So if you wish to borrow that, it will soon find its way to the Temple Library. This conversation is just the beginning. As our panelists and Rabbi Dara Lithwick reflected, there is support and advocacy work to be done. So stay tuned for how we might do that together. And as Rabbi Splansky mentioned, there will be a recording of this event in the Women's Advocacy Group section of the Holy Blossom YouTube channel, HBTV. Those who registered for this event will receive the link to the recording in a follow-up email in the coming days. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Laila Tov, good evening, and a Shana Tova, a good and healthy new year to all. Good night.